So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. iPhone SE 2022 third generation, a few days later. So I want to begin by discussing what I feel like after a few days with the body and the build. I gotta say that yes, it still feels classic iPhone days for sure. I'm constantly reminded that I'm an older designed iPhone when I do pick up the iPhone SE 3. However, I do still like the rounded corners. It feels pretty comfortable in this phone, and it's a really lightweight and thin design. So if you're into that lighter weight one-handed feel, I just remembered how easy it is to one-hand this phone right here. So if you like one-handed iPhones, it's quite nice. Also, the aspect ratio on this phone, aka how wide the display feels, is quite good. So even though it's only a 4.7-inch display, I will say that this phone right here does give you quite a bit of screen space, even though it's a 4.7. It's pretty acceptable. It's not a large display by no means, but it's acceptable and it's workable. I do like that. In terms of the display though, after a few days, I gotta say, while it's still plenty bright indoors, I didn't have no issues there. As you look closer, you can definitely see this display is nowhere near as sharp as some of the newer iPhones on the market. Now my camera's gonna make it look better than it really does, but at least it is accurate, and at least you do have the similar features you'll find on the newer iPhones like dark mode, true tone, night shift, brought by the software. Also, I'll say that the bezels, they're kind of noticeable for sure if you're comparing to one of the newer phones. However, you have to keep in mind that some people that are upgrading from the iPhone 8, the iPhone 7, never really had some of those newer iPhones, so this is not anything different for them. It will just be an upgraded phone, faster chip, better camera, better battery, and they're already used to having bezels. So if you never changed, it's not going to be a big deal here. One thing I will say is that the LCD panel has been quite nice. You know, coming from OLED, it's just easy on the eye. It really looks similar to what you'll find on like an iPad or even a MacBook in terms of the technology, liquid crystal display. Some people don't like or prefer OLED, and I've been enjoying using LCD. It's kind of easy on the eye, not even gonna joke with you. I found this display not to be ultra bright outdoors though, so if you're looking for better brightness outdoors, this is probably not gonna be the move for you. I wanna take a quick second to talk about Touch ID though, because Touch ID is something I've been enjoying. I went out taking photos with this yesterday. I'm pulling it out of my pocket. I'm just barely tapping it one time. It's got that haptic feedback, so when you tap it, it kind of vibrates, and it just opens so fast. You just rest your finger to open. Well, you have to set that in accessibility, but it's super accurate. And I actually was thinking about, man, I miss Touch ID. I still love Face ID. I kind of wish they had both, like a Touch ID in the power button and then a Face ID as well, two options. However, I'm not sure that'll happen, but this felt very nice to use, the Touch ID. So I think that's something that, even though it's old, it's still a cool technology. I still enjoy using it. Over the past few days, I gotta say, iOS 15.4 has been somewhat of a joy to use on this phone, and mostly because it ran very well on this device, and because this phone, this style of screen and stuff has been out for a long time, all the apps have been properly optimized for this display for years, so everything runs perfectly fine. Literally have no crashes at all in the past few days. Not a single hiccup, not a single crash. So very good performance. The software is kind of neat too, because even though this phone has that older body, it's really what brings this phone to the modern era is the software. When I'm using the app library and I'm using the control center, it looks just like an iPhone 13 Pro Max, or I'm looking at the widgets and stuff, and it's essentially the same exact experience besides the fact you got to pull up for the control center. It just feels like modern, and that's something I enjoyed. Even though it's an SE and it's not going to give you all the greatest hardware, it still felt modern, and it's mostly brought together by that software. So this is a key reason why this phone will still sell, and it's mostly that you're getting iOS. It's the cheapest way to get into iOS. Now, I will say the performance on this phone also has been fantastic. I just mentioned a few minutes ago how this thing doesn't have any lags over my past few days, and I gotta tell you, while it doesn't feel as snappy to navigate through because you don't have the gesture-based OS, but even though it doesn't have the gesture base from the iPhone 13 Pro, it's still snappy in pretty much all of its actions, and Apple did bring the whole 4 gigs of RAM instead of 3 gigs of RAM, just like the iPhone 13, so it feels quite good in that respect. A few days later, I will share with you a few samples in a minute here of the camera, but when Apple was mentioning about how they're processing with the A15, you could see it on the website, like how the camera still got better because of the HDR and stuff like that. You know, it's true. The camera actually looked almost identical to me to the iPhone 13 on the main sensor. Like the pictures almost turned out the same. Like I could barely even tell the difference between this and the 13 on just a regular photo. So I think the average person who just wants to take a really good photo is still going to get that great experience from iPhone. I think this beats most main cameras on any phone in this price range. In addition, you have the ability to go to rich contrast, vibrant, and you get essentially all those same photo modes and video modes as the more premium iPhones, which is quite nice. However, you don't get, you know, a really improved front-facing camera. While it does look a little bit better than previous editions, it's still not going to give you higher megapixel count on the front there, and it doesn't go past HD in video, which I do not like, especially considering it's supposed to be like a special edition. It should have a little bit better front-facing camera, but it's going to be fine for the target customer of this camera. I will say though that I enjoyed the simplicity, not having to think about an extra lens. It just felt simple to use. It reminded me of the old school iPhones where you just pulled it out and snapped a picture. However, at the same time, I was missing the fact that I couldn't zoom in with a telephoto zoom lens or an ultra wide angle for a little bit more creativity. However, at the end of the day, I think it has all the core iPhone features you would need. And yes, you still can zoom if you want a little bit just by pinching in like so. So check out some of my samples and let me know your thoughts on the iPhone SE 3rd generation. Something that a lot of people probably care a ton to know about is the battery life. Nick, what have you been experiencing here? And it's pretty much a day if you're medium use, and if you're heavy use, you're probably charging this 7-8 o'clock at night. I find it to be about an hour to an hour and a half better than the SE 2nd gen, which is an improvement, but it's nothing amazing. The phone still, for me, is only getting around 4 hours to 4.5 hours screen time. One thing I was shocked by is that the audio performance was actually quite good. To me, it looks definitely more like a military looking green right here. So let's go ahead and see right. So even though this speaker is not the loudest out there, it got plenty loud for this price range, and it's dual setup. There's speaker up here, speaker down here. So it didn't feel cheap in no regard. It's of course not as crispy as a 13 Pro or anything like that, but it sounded fine. Mobile performance. Now I took my SIM out because I don't leave it in for videos. I want people calling me and stuff like that. At the same time, I gotta say that the bar strength was good. 5G was similar. It's not exactly the same as the 13 Pro because they have some certain bands this phone don't support. But for the most part, I was getting about the same mobile performance on here, which is pretty good considering that this phone has that older design. See, it's kind of like hiding the fact that it has all this modern tech in this older feel. But it's pretty good. And of course, because the speakers were loud enough, speakerphone calls were fine as well. Now, let me talk about a few things I did not like about this phone. Number one, I did not like watching videos. This bezels get in the way. It's just not the best experience. However, because it's 16:9, a lot of videos will display properly and they will fill the screen. But this would have been a more enjoyable video experience if it was the plus size. This phone's just too small and just feels like a little rectangle. It's just not a great, I mean, it works, but it's not the best media experience. I would much prefer to watch videos and read on a much larger iPhone. However, that might not matter to a lot of you, but at the same time, this is probably one of the lowest in terms of how good the media experience is. The next thing I didn't like is that there wasn't at least a dual camera. I kind of touched on that in the camera section, but I didn't like the fact that I didn't have at least a telephoto or an ultra wide. I just feel like, why do Samsung able to put 4 cameras on an A53? You know, they're putting all these cameras on these Android phones. You could say, well, their cameras aren't as good, and that's why. Well, hey, at the same time, there's 4 options. This phone, I have one option, which is kind of lame considering the price is about the same. So come on, Apple, you could throw, even if it's a cheaper or not quite as good second camera on here, it's not going to affect the bottom line too much. Let's get a second camera on the XSE at least. The next thing I didn't like is that there wasn't a bigger phone option. Again, I touched on that a little bit, but come on, like, let's get an SE Plus. It's 2022. People want a smaller and a larger phone. I think this would have just helped sales even more if they had the SE and SE Plus and they just kind of recycled the iPhone 8 Plus. Let's conclude by saying this. Even though I know a lot of people don't care, in this price range, I would beg to say that a lot of people would actually like if Apple would do something different here, would bring something bigger, would bring something a little bit nicer at this money. It is 2022, and I think even the average Joe is starting to see that iPhone is old. You don't need to be a techie person to see that. Is that a new iPhone or is that an iPhone 6? Like, people know what new iPhones look like at this point. So at this time, I don't think you're going to confuse anybody, but is people still going to buy it? Absolutely. They're selling these by the boatload, and people are going to buy it for companies and businesses and work and give it to their employees. And some people in a budget area is going to want to buy this because it's in their price range and they get the latest chip and stuff like that. So there is value here. At the same time, this is an older iPhone with newer internals. I get that. It's kind of a weird experience because even though it has all that old feel, you still feel like you have a great phone. Don't get me wrong, but you feel like, there's something that can be improved here, and it's mostly, it can have a nicer screen, it could have improved cameras. It's like they're giving you everything you want besides the hardware, which is kind of like something you feel the most, which is saying something. And I think about this phone after a few days, I'm thinking, in 5 years, how old is this phone going to look? There might be flipping and folding iPhones by then. The promise is you'll get long software support, but how old will this feel? It's going to feel archaic. It kind of already feels like a dinosaur. And don't confuse my criticisms of this phone as dislike. I actually loved using this. It feels really good to use. It's polished. It's fast. It feels classic. There's a lot to love about this phone. At the end of the day, I'm just ready to see Apple do something different. It's as simple as that. So let me know your thoughts on the iPhone SE 3. Did you pick one up? Do you enjoy it? Are you happy with the design? Do you still love this? And you're like, Nick, bro, I don't care about all those complaints you had. I still love the classic iPhone. This is what I want. This is what I got. Let me know your thoughts down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Nick here. Be sure to be well. I will catch you all in the next episode, and peace.